Good evening all and welcome. For those of you who have been following me for a while, you may be aware that very rarely, from time to time, I will showcase a smaller channel that I deem very worthy of your subscription. Tonight, I'd like to draw the spotlight to Papa Scare. This guy has an insanely good voice, uploads quality content twice a week, and in my humble opinion, is one of the best up-and-coming narrators in the community. I personally would really like it if you could check out his channel, and today's stories are all exclusively being narrated by him. But don't let that scare you, he is truly terrific. So why not listen on, check him out, and subscribe when you're done. Link in the description, and there'll be more info at the end of the video. But for now, it's time to get comfortable so that we can delve into some of the worst in humanity, to let the darkness take control.
When I was 17, I moved to college 2 hours away from home and took residence in the dorms on campus. The dorms were not run through the school, but through a management company. There were a lot of safety problems in the dorms as a result of this. Assaults, ODs, drugs, shootings right outside, etc. I'm a 100-pound female, so I always watch out for serious situations around me. Everything was great. I had some awful roommates, but I was mostly left alone. One day in September, I was leaving for class early in the morning when I spotted a condom taped to my name tag on the door. It had a note that said, "Call me, XOXO," with some random phone number. I told the RAs, and nothing came of it. I just thought it was some random prank, pulled by one of the guys on the floor. Things went south with my roommates, mostly because of my night terrors scaring them, even though I warned them before we even agreed to be roommates. So I was moved into a 2-bedroom dorm with my new roommate, Jay. We each had our own room. After a week of living there, I started noticing that things were appearing in the living room while we were sleeping. I asked Jay about it, and she vehemently denied it was her. One day we noticed that the lock on the front door did not lock properly. If you pulled on the lock and twisted the handle at the same time, the door would come open. Around the same time, I started getting Snapchats of inappropriate things, vague threats and offers for great sex. I would get one that would say things like, "You look great today with that specific article of clothing I was wearing." I filed a report to the dorms to get the lock fixed, but it took 4 months, 8 complaints, threat of legal action, and my friend D yelling at them to get any action. We got our door fixed, but the presence still appeared outside of the door with notes for me. I was still receiving Snapchats, but I moved out of the dorms into an apartment with my then boyfriend. The Snapchats continued. Then I started getting calls at my work. I worked for the dean's office of my college, and I was in charge of answering phones. Every day I would get 3 or more calls from randomly generated numbers that I discovered was through apps like Viber and Skype after I reported it to the police and they investigated. I would answer the phone. "CLAS, Dean's office, this is Fantapants, how may I help you?" I would hear heavy breathing for a few seconds, then they would hang up. I thought it was just some 12-year-old pranking our office until my coworker got a call. She answered with her name, and the person on the line asked if they could speak with me. Thinking it was one of the deans that I had been working with, she forwarded it to my phone. I answered, and I received the same heavy breathing and hung up. I reported it to my boss. She did nothing. One of the deans overheard the conversation and reported it to Title IX. Oh boy, talking to them was a mistake. After the meeting with them, the threats started getting worse, and this person found me in my new apartment. One day in December, I was dog-sitting 2 wonderful dogs who hated other dogs and would bark at them on sight. It was around 11 p.m. and I decided to take them out before bed. We get outside. To the right of me is a bunch of thick trees that are hard to see through. I start to take the girls to the grass on the left. They start growling and barking at something in the trees. Thinking it's another dog, I try to pull them away, but they will not budge. I glance over and out of the trees comes a tall man. But the weird thing is, he is wearing a Michael Myers-like mask. He starts rushing towards me. The dogs get between me and him. He stops. I run up the stairs behind me into the apartment as he is disappearing into the trees again. Stupidly, I don't call the police, but I see him one more time before I move to my new apartment. Things are quiet for a while. My boyfriend and I break up, and I spend the first few days in the new apartment alone. Come to find out, the window that can be accessed from the ground doesn't lock. One morning I wake up, everything seems normal. I check the mirror to do my hair for work. I have a bald spot. My head was shaved in the middle of the night. I find my hair tied up in knots in an envelope. I immediately call the police. They do an investigation, find the window was broken, but can't find anything to figure out who it was that came into my apartment. They ask me to compile a list of everything that was missing, and the only thing gone, other than my hair, was 3 pairs of dirty underwear. An investigation finds no one. I have since moved. I no longer answer phones at my work, and I keep bear spray next to my bed at all times. This whole thing started around a year ago. I live in a ranch-style home in the middle of Missouri on 1.8 acres of nothing but woods. We bought the house almost 2 years ago. The house was vacant for over 8 months before we purchased it, and the realtors had problems with squatters about 3 months into the house being for sale, but said nothing had happened since. My elderly grandmother lives with me, as I am her caregiver. It's just the 2 of us and our dogs. We moved into the house in early October of 2016. The first incident occurred in March of 2017. We started seeing a bunch of plastic bags and trash around the back of our house, further out than either of us go. Didn't think much of it, but did make a mental note that raccoons or something could be getting into our trash. I put some bungee cords on the cans to hold the lids down and wrote it off at that. One night, I was coming home much later than normal, around 1:30 a.m. All of the land is fenced in, but there is one back gate. Near the back gate, I see a bunch of trees rustling. There is a lot of wildlife in our area, so I assumed that's what it was. But I got that horrible feeling in the pit of my stomach and decided to go check it out. The ground was dry enough that I was able to drive through the yard in my car with the doors locked. I shone my headlights on the trees and a man came running out of them. If that wasn't terrifying enough, he ran straight for the gate as if he knew exactly where it was, opened it and left. I was absolutely terrified, so I called my dad, who lives in the area. He explained to me how large the population of homeless people is in our area, and that he'd be over the next day to put a lock on the gate. About 2 weeks after the first incident, I was letting my dogs outside. One had already gone inside and the other was playing hard to get as usual. I began calling out her name. It wasn't even dark outside. After about 3 calls, another voice, distinctly male, started calling out her name. She began barking aggressively and running for the house. I was freaked out, but again, let my family talk me out of making a call to the authorities. About a month passes. My grandmother has a habit of forgetting to close the garage door behind her. Around 11 p.m., our neighbor from across the street knocks on our door. He says he was outside smoking and he saw 2 men standing in our garage talking. He said as soon as he started walking over, they ran off. What scares me the most about this event is they stole nothing. And there was plenty to steal. We have a brand new refrigerator, leaf blower, power tools, and my grandma leaves the keys in the car. They were just talking. This time I called the police, and they told me in the nicest way possible they couldn't do anything. If there was another incident, to call them and to not scare the men away. The final incident of 2017 happened probably 3 months after the prior one. We have a sun porch attached to the outside of the house. The door connects to the kitchen and the outside door to the deck. Basically, we left for several hours to go grocery shopping. We came home and all our deck furniture was stacked on top of each other, and the screen ripped off the sun porch door. I called the non-emergency hotline for my area, and once again they said with no idea who these people are, nothing could be done. About 2 weeks ago now, we had our white vinyl fence power washed. Because the fence is quite old, a post came off the fence and the company that power washed the fence didn't know how to fix it. And we didn't blame them, so they had no reason to. We left the post in the front yard, but up against the fence. We came home a couple of days later and the post was nailed back, with a smiley face sticky note attached to it. This very easily could have been a kind neighbor, but I was immediately spooked. Cut to Saturday of last week. My grandmother is able to drive again, but doesn't have her own car. I'm busy working around the house, so she decides to take herself to the doctor. My grandmother leaves the house through our door connected to the garage, and I lock it behind her. It never dawns on me to check to make sure she has closed it. About 20 minutes after she leaves, someone starts heavily banging on the door. When I say banging, I mean it sounds like the SWAT team. Someone was putting all of their force into banging on that door. My dogs are going nuts, and I don't know what to think. I start to think maybe my grandma left something and is trying to get my attention. But the little voice in the back of my head stops me and tells me, there is no way that little old lady is banging on the door like that. Suddenly, it stops, and I hear a deep, distinctly male laugh. I grab the baseball bat out of my bedroom and lock myself in the bathroom with my dogs. I realize I've left my phone outside the bathroom, but I was too afraid to go out of the bathroom and get it. I took the lid of the tank of the toilet, so I now had 2 weapons. Nothing happened, and I hid in that bathroom until my grandma was home again. So that's the story. I know there wasn't some big confrontation or climax, but I fear the story may not be over yet. I don't know if any of these events are connected at all, but I've got it in my head that they are, and I'm driving myself nuts to a point where I'm afraid to be alone in my own house. The only reason I even included the fence is because there hasn't been a single sketchy thing happen at all in 2018. And then someone fixes the fence, and less than a week later, another scary encounter. I honestly don't know what to think. So rather this is one or multiple people, I really hope whatever this is over. And whoever is doing this, let's not meet. I've pushed this from my mind in the past couple of months, because any activity has seemingly stopped. Yet somehow I knew this silence was too good to be true, and eventually, we will hear from him again sooner or later. It all started a few months ago. A guy messaged me on Facebook, and unlike the usual creepy messages I get, this one sounded intelligent and funny. We started chatting from time to time, talking about anything and everything. He said he was divorced with 1 child, and I empathized every time he would complain about his ex-wife. Even though it also kind of bothered me that he would tell all those personal details to a virtual stranger. After all, no matter what happened between them, she was still the mother of his child. Have some respect. We continued chatting and I'm getting more relaxed. We are at the stage where we often discuss our daily lives, and inevitably, I talk about my best friend. with whom I am extremely close. We are like sisters. At that particular time, she had been very busy with changes happening at her work and some issues with a guy she met, but said things are complicated and she'll explain in detail when there is more time to meet. Now keep in mind that under normal circumstances, I would have known every little detail about that. But as it happened then, there wasn't sufficient time to properly see each other and talk. So I only knew the basics, no names, no pictures, etc. So I am talking to my guy. For the sake of privacy, we will call him Jake. And I start taking notice that every time we do, he would casually direct the conversation towards my best friend, Jenna. I have mentioned to him that we have known each other since we were babies, practically grew up together, so he would always ask me to tell him funny stories from our childhood and teen years, then proceed inquiring about what she is like now, what kind of guys she likes, etc. I would jokingly ask if he got tired of me and wanted her number, but he would deflect it with awkward humor, so I didn't really think anything past that. Some time had passed, and things were a bit calmer at Jen's work, so we finally got to meet for drinks. Inevitably, we start discussing Jake. I tell her about him and she is smiling and nodding, until I take out my phone and show her his pictures, and she goes pale in the face. She grabs my phone and says, "This is him. This is the guy I told you about." At first, I assume she is joking, as she is prone to messing with me, but she looks dead serious, so I start asking questions. Turns out, she met him on a dating app. They talked first, and she was under the same impression, that he was smart, charming, and cultured, so when he eventually asked her out, she gladly accepted. They went out, had drinks, talked, and everything was fine, until by the end of the evening he got a little too grabby and insistent for more than a goodnight kiss. He insisted to drive her home, even though she had her own car there, and suggested that he could pick her up in the morning to get her car. Since she didn't want him to know where she lived, and she was annoyed at his advances, she refused and managed to escape him somehow. She told me that she was afraid he would follow her home, so instead she went to a bar where a friend of hers worked after that. The next day he called her and apologized for his behavior at the end of the evening. He blamed the drinks and the stress at his work, and then told her that he had to admit something to her, because he really liked her and wanted to be honest with her. She agreed and they met again, where he admitted that he was actually in the process of getting a divorce but hadn't actually filed for it, and that he was still living with his wife and small child because she didn't have a job and he couldn't just leave her alone tending for their child before she was financially stable. Jenna, being the blunt gal that she is, called bullshit his story and accused him of being yet another married man out to cheat and using false excuses for sympathy. The guy worked as a sales rep, so he was really smooth and convincing. So I don't know how, but he managed to appease her doubts, at least to a point of not cutting him off right there and then. Some time passes and he chats to her online, calls her and they talk. But she tells him that the only way she would ever consider getting intimate with him would be if she sees proof that he is actually divorced and lives separately from his family. One day he calls her and tells her that he will put his wife on the phone to prove to her that even though they live together, they sleep in separate rooms and are technically separated. A woman's voice really confirms that, but it leaves Jenna more puzzled than reassured. She is conflicted because despite everything, she actually likes the guy and is therefore worried to not get herself into a mess if she falls deeper. She is still hesitant to accept his invitations to meet, so one day he accidentally walks past this place she works at exactly the time she finishes work. What are the chances, right? And she agrees to go grab a drink. As long as they talk and act platonic, he promises. And apparently that is also when she tells him about her life more, childhood, etc., and where I am brought up into the conversation. He listens attentively, and afterwards when she and I compared timelines, it turns out exactly a few days after that, my guy starts to message me on Facebook. We are both livid and incredulous, so we decide to confront him separately and then compare notes. When I get back home, I text him asking why he lied to me that he was divorced, when he clearly is still living with his family, and more importantly, why he started talking to me when he was already seeing my best friend. He was unprepared for that, but he bounced back quickly and gave me some bullshit explanation how he was curious about me when he heard so much from Jenna and wanted to see what I looked like. So he went through her Facebook friends list and found me. Mind you, she hasn't added him on Facebook, so he basically stalked her profile to gather that information. Just like she didn't exactly tell him where she worked, yet he knew to accidentally walk past there. When Jenna confronted him, he told her that he was just curious and wanted to hear about her from the person that knows her best friend. She told him that it was wrong and creepy on so many levels, but he insisted he had no bad intentions and that he just liked her so much, that his curiosity got the better of him, etc. When we compare notes after that, Jenna and I decide to just stop talking to him whatsoever, because the guy is a liar and extremely weird. We tell him that we don't want to talk to him or see him again, and even though he is shocked and tries to convince us otherwise, he eventually accepts that and says that if we change our mind, he will be happy to talk. We think that it's over. At first, he seems to take it well, but then he would accidentally send a picture or a message which was intended for someone else but mistakenly sent to me or Jenna, just so he could initiate a conversation. He would attempt to ask her or me out again, get refused, and then retreat again until the next accidental message or call. Then the random bumping into each other ensued. Wherever we would go, on my way to work, at the market, at the cafe, at Jenna's gym, he would be there. Of course, it was all random coincidence. We started to get annoyed more than anything at this point, but still thought he was a lying bastard, but still harmless. So there was not much we could do, except wait it out, thinking he would eventually move on. Wrong. One day Jenna comes to my place freaked out, and she tells me that she was on a date with a new guy she met, and she saw Jake passing by the restaurant she was in. And then later he called her in hysterics, screaming at her, "Look what you did. I can't get you out of my mind. Because of you, I got so angry that I hit my child and chased my wife out of the house in the cold." She got fed up with him, so she told him to never bother her again and go seek a therapist because he clearly has issues, then blocked him. That creeped us both out, because not only wasn't he moving on, he seemed to have been escalating and getting aggressive. I told her that if he calls her again, we should threaten him with calling the police and reporting that he was allegedly abusive towards his family. We are in the middle of discussing that when I get a call from an unknown number. Normally I don't pick up on those, but I was also waiting for a package delivery and thought it might be from the courier company. It was him. He was crying. He was sobbing on the phone, pleading with me to convince Jenna to unblock him, that it wasn't fair and I had to help him. He sounded crazy, to be honest. I was shocked to hear him in this state. It was such a contrast to his normally smooth demeanor, so I calmly told him that he should act like a grown man and calm down, and that it is not my place to convince her about anything after she made up her mind, especially after his crazy behavior and threats about hitting his child and chasing his wife out. He then told me that he didn't really do that, but he wanted to make Jenna feel guilty and scare her into talking to him. So he said that. He started apologizing profusely about it and said he was at his wit's end and didn't know what to do. I told him that this has gone on far enough and that he is a 35-year-old man, so he should act like it, and that if he ever proceeds contacting or stalking us, we will go to the police. I hung up and blocked him as well. The police threat seemed to work finally. We haven't heard from him in about 2 months, but yesterday, Jenna and I were at a birthday party at a club, and guess who was the birthday girls +1? Update. Since my last post, I've mentioned in the comments that I told the birthday girl about Jake, showed her some chat logs, and frankly, she didn't need much convincing. Apparently, she had already sensed some red flags in regards of weird vibes from him and his intense behavior. She blocked him on the spot, didn't even explain to him why. It would be pointless anyway, since he never cares what either of us has said to him. He only cares about himself and his apparent fixation. The last couple of days were calm and uneventful. Neither of us has accidentally met him anywhere. But, of course, it was never a matter of if, but rather when he will try something again. And also, to whom he will reach out first. It was to Jenna. This morning she called me and told me that he has made a new account on a dating app that they first met on, and messaged her there. The infuriating part is, his message is not in any way acknowledging that he has been blocked everywhere else, and that she clearly stated that she doesn't want to hear from him again. She blocked him again, and that apparently deleted the message as well. I would have loved to include a screenshot. I warned her, if he texts her again, anywhere, to make screenshots. Here's what the message contained. I'm not sure if you know this song, but I just discovered it, and it made me think of you. The song is Adagio by Lara Fabian. He included a link to it, but I will just post parts of the lyrics for you to get the full effect of the message.
I don't know where to find you. I don't know how to reach you. I hear your voice in the wind. I feel you under my skin. Within my heart and my soul, I wait for you. All of these nights without you, all of my dreams surround you. I see and I touch your face. I fall into your embrace. When the time is right, I know you'll be in my arms. I close my eyes and I find a way. No need for me to pray. I've walked so far, I've fought so hard, nothing more to explain.
Another important thing to note is that I have spoken to a friend who is in local law enforcement and told him about the situation. And he basically advised us not to engage in any way with him, not even to respond or tell him to leave us alone, to block him and keep the evidence. And that, sadly, they can't do much unless he tries anything physical, because all of those instances of us bumping into him were all in public places, so he didn't break any laws. Yeah, what can I say? Stalking needs to be implemented in the criminal laws here, but it still isn't. My friends always tell me I have an unusual knack for attracting weirdos, and this is always the first story that gets brought up when we talk about it. So I thought I'd share my experience with this guy from when I was back in secondary school. I'm in my final year of university now, and this guy still haunts me sometimes. When I was in secondary school, around 6 years ago now, I was friends with a group that constantly added more and more people into it. It was a good way to get to know more people from other schools, and generally, these people were quite nice and never invited creeps. One day, a new guy started to turn up and hang out with our group. For the sake of the story, I'll call him John. John was 2 years older than me, and when I first met him, I thought he was a little weird, but everyone in our group got on with him. He was good friends with someone who went to my school, so I didn't think on it too much, and just tried to get to know him. He told me whereabout he lived, what he was studying at college, and a little bit about his family. And interested, I probed him a little further. This is where things began to get a little strange, bearing in mind that I had just met him that day. He began to get all excited and told me about his father was a vampire, and his mum was impregnated by him, using that exact word, which unsettled me. He said, jokingly, but looking back on it, it's a tad frightening, that I should be worried about him because he's half vampire, and he'd be coming for me in the night, and then kicked over a metal bin. Safe to say, I thought he was a downright weirdo, but I didn't go out of my way to be mean to him or ignore him. He seemed nice enough and friendly, and he never presented himself as anything but an ordinary guy. My best friend Maisie was really flirtatious in her personality, and John took to her really quickly after he met her. We used to go on walks, and if we found interesting abandoned places, we'd play manhunt or something, and every time we did this, he would actively try to find Maisie instead of anyone else. She hated this because she was already dating someone and knew that he was trying to get her attention, and so she flat out told him that she wasn't interested in him. He soon stopped even talking to her. I guess out of pity, I began to be kinder to him. I saw that the tides were turning in our friendship group, and people were beginning to talk badly of him because Maisie was really popular and well liked in the group. And even though she hadn't told anyone to act differently, the fact that he'd unnerved and upset her set people against him. So actively, I tried to be nicer to him. I knew what it felt like to be outcasted, and I wanted him not to feel left out. This was something I would come to regret. We began talking most nights, and we would video chat every other night because he said he was feeling lonely, or he just wanted to see my cute little face. I never thought too much of his comments, because I just thought they were compliments. At the time, I never really thought too much on the things guys said about me, or to me, as I was busy studying for my GCSEs, and those were constantly on my mind. He would offer to help me study, even though he knew nothing on the things I was studying. I thought it was sweet, but I always studied better alone, so I always said no. He would insist, but I'd again say no. Soon things escalated, and he started turning up outside my school to try and see me. When I would get upset, he'd pass it off as he was actually there to see someone else. But he'd always open with he was there for me. Some of my school friends began getting involved. They'd say that they were concerned and that he seemed like a creeper, and that he was too old to be hanging around our school gates. Even our head teacher came out once and lambasted him for loitering around the school's property. It was so humiliating. However, things really came to a head around April. It was my 16th birthday. He was 18, soon to be 19 by the way. And I was at home getting ready to go out and meet my friends to go to the cinema. My dad was at work and my mum was out doing the shopping, and it was just me in the house when there was a knock on the door. It couldn't have been my parents because they both had keys and my brothers were all still at school, so I presumed it was going to be my friends and their parents come to pick me up and take me to the cinema. So imagine my surprise when I opened the door and John was stood there with a present tucked under his arm. He greeted me happily and pushed the gift into my hands and said it was my birthday gift. I was really confused as I hadn't told him it was my birthday, and what's more, I'd never given him my address. While I assumed at the time one of my friends had given him my address, it later came out that no one had actually given him my address. He didn't say much else, and then walked off, hands in pockets, and I shut and locked the door. The messaging and calling continued. It worsened when he began texting me. Once again, I had never given him my phone number, and no one admitted to giving it to him. One of my school friends joked that he was stalking me, and maybe she should have bought me a knife for my birthday. We laughed it off, but looking back on it, I don't think it was genuine laughter. After a few more incidents here and there, I stopped talking to him. He messaged me constantly, but I never replied. And one day, he just stopped messaging me altogether. I was relieved and I was able to continue with my life and studies, and I vaguely fell back into my normal routine, with no worry he'd just turn up. I had a friend, Katie, who had only joined the group about a month before. She was 13 and went to a local school. She was really lovely and she was one of my closest friends, even though I'd only known her for a month. One day, she confided with me that John had now begun harassing her that he messaged her constantly. He surprised her with unannounced visits to her house in the early morning. She had never given him her address, and she confided in me that he had tried to assault her in his house after giving her alcohol. I was horrified and felt my blood run cold. But like me, she grew up in a very strict household. Her mum was a strict Orthodox Christian, and she feared her mum wouldn't believe her, so we kept it to ourselves. She had a boyfriend, and she couldn't even tell him, fearing that he would try and hurt John or do something that would get himself in trouble. So I never told anyone. All in all, it was a tough situation. John hated that she was with someone else, and though he'd turned his affections away from me, I still felt involved and tried hard to keep Katie away from him. One night in about October, our group decided to go camping. At this point, there was a consensus to not invite John to things we did, and he had slowly dissolved from our friend group. We were camping a few towns out from ours, in a field next to a Boy Scouts club, so we felt safe enough. It was a really cold night, and we didn't have enough blankets, so me, Katie, and another 2 people shared a tent and huddled together to keep warm when we went to bed. At about 4 a.m., I woke up to go to the toilet. I could hear rustling outside and presumed it to be a fox or the wind, and headed out to brave the gross weather. I sat down in the bushes to pee when I heard the unmistakable break of a branch and looked over to where I heard the noise from. It was John. He saw me and I saw him, and I literally couldn't believe he was there. He looked like a serial killer, half shrouded in the bushes and his eyes gleaming in the moonlight. After about 5 seconds of staring, he just walked in the other direction, into the tree line. I stumbled back into the tent in shock and didn't breathe until the tent was fully zipped up again. I cried quietly for an hour before I fell asleep again. The next morning, I asked if anyone had invited him or if he even knew where he was. It was a closed group chat and none of us told anyone where we were going, meaning he had to have followed us from the train station to this area. Who knows how long he was there? People thought I was dreaming, but I wasn't. It was him as clear as day, and I will never ever forget the bored and plain look on his face as he turned and walked away. Like I didn't even see him. After this incident, he never messaged any of us again. I never saw him again. He was like a ghost who existed in my life for 9 to 10 months. We spoke about him and the fact that he was so weird, but we never ever invited him to hang again. Some of my friends at the time didn't even believe that any of this happened, though me and Katie don't talk about it much, as it's still something that she doesn't even like mentioning to this day. Even just his name being mentioned upsets her. I don't even know what happened to him, but I call him my casual stalker, because his stalking of me wasn't nearly as severe as Katie's. She told me he'd just walk and follow behind her sometimes after the camping incident. But I never saw him again. So, to my casual stalker, let's not meet again. This started around 3 years ago. I, 22 female, was 19 and attending a weekly web design course just in the middle of a big city. It was located in a very busy avenue with lots of stores and just a non-stop wave of people and cars around. Me, a very hungry person, would almost always go to a big market nearby after classes to buy some snacks or food for lunch. And coincidentally, my bus stop was just in front of it. Now, I must add 2 things. 1, I'm a small, 5'1" woman with a baby face. I'm the least menacing person ever. People always took me as a few years younger. And 2, I'm fairly distracted and often get lost in thoughts while I'm walking and barely stare at people. So what made me notice him was the feeling of absolute dread when he passed by. I remember looking over my shoulder immediately and finding a man around his 50s with greasy red hair and a murderous look in his eyes staring back at me. Like I said earlier, we were in a very busy avenue, so it made no sense to just stop and stare at a stranger like that. Even if I threw a look over my shoulder, I never stopped walking, or else someone would bump into me. And being very honest, I didn't give much attention to it because, being a girl in a third world country, we sure receive some unsettling stares sometimes. I brushed it off, but didn't really forget, and I told my grandma when I got home since she always asked me about my day. She joked that he probably thought that my hair was ugly. I used to dye it bright pink, and it would fall behind my back in thick waves, and we laughed it off. And then, it happened again the next following weeks. I would get out of classes, go grocery shopping, and to my bus stop and pass by him. Every time, the feeling of dread would get stronger. My grandma started to notice that I would get home with no color in my cheeks and looking nervous. I had no other explanation other than that he had a similar schedule, and that's why we would cross paths. But even if we did, it was pure luck to pass by the same person in a crowded downtown. What if I had gotten out of class 5-10 minutes earlier? What if I had stopped at some store on my way? It was weird, but not straight up scary. That is, until I stopped seeing him in the streets, only to see him inside the market. No carts, never holding any products, just pretending to look around in the same aisle as me. Now this market is more expensive than others around here, so it's way less frequented, and it's common some aisles to be empty, which is one of the reasons that I always go shopping there. But when it was only me and that man alone in the back of the market, I felt my stomach getting ice cold. Even after all that time, I still remember how my vision went dark for a moment. I don't know if it is a normal reaction when we get scared, but I was seeing black the whole way until I reached the front where cashiers and security guards stay. Thankfully, my grandma raised me since a young age to be very careful around people. It doesn't matter who or where I am. If I ever feel uncomfortable and or in a dangerous situation, I must go to where there's more people, seek help or scream the loudest possible. I considered telling the security guard about him, but he wasn't in fact doing anything to me. To anyone else looking at the situation, it was just a random guy grocery shopping. And part of me still thought that I could be overreacting, and even though he stared at me in such an angry, threatening way, I didn't want to put someone in trouble in case I was mistaken. So I just paid for my food and got safely home. It wasn't a one-off thing. I would see him pretty much every time that I would go to that store. The same day and the same hour. He was never carrying anything like everyone else there, just pretending to look around, and when I would walk in the direction of the guards, he simply vanished. It's important that you guys know that it would happen every Saturday between 10 and 11 a.m. The same thing happened for several months over and over until I finally finished my course and didn't go back around that area for a while. I couldn't say that I forgot him because every once in a while, when I would go out, my friends joked like, "Hey, have you seen your personal creeper?" But I pushed his memory to the back of my mind as a just very weird person that I wouldn't see again. I wish it was the end of it. Last November, I had a big exam coming, and studying at the Starbucks was a nice change of air. One day, I ended up studying until very late, and my grandma called me saying to meet her at that market so we could grab some dinner and come home together, since it's pretty dangerous to walk alone. Well, we were talking and minding our own business, and we got separated for a bit when she went to find something in the other aisle. I was distracted, messing around on my phone, and when she came back, had a strange expression on her face, staring over my shoulder. She described a man and asked very quietly if it matched the appearance of that guy I told her about. It was him. When I confirmed, She said that she knew right away that it was him because he was lurking behind me, with a very dangerous look in his eyes. She said she had seen some nasty looks in people's faces, but that man wasn't staring at me in a way that nasty older men look at younger girls. He had a predator stare with intention to hurt me. She said when he saw her, he turned around and walked away. And at this point, I was shaking so much that I could barely hold my phone. After so long and so many encounters, I felt like I was about to throw up because it wasn't Saturday morning like all the other times. It was 8 to 9 p.m. on a Monday, and the store was almost closing. It was very silent and dark outside. I was tired and distracted. I still can't explain it. I don't know this man. I have no idea how he simply knew when I would be there, even in very different times. After that night, I never saw him again. I think he probably thought I would be alone, since I would always go grocery shopping alone before, and seeing me with someone else could have scared him off. I don't know. Sometimes all of it seems out of a nightmare. I understand it isn't creepy like some stories here, but how I would feel when he was around. It was a pure evil feeling. It would make my body go weak. It's been almost a year, but sometimes I still think 3 things. 1. What if I didn't notice him? 2. What if he's out there and I just can't see him? And 3. What could have happened if my grandma wasn't with me that night?
Hey guys, it's Mort here. Thank you so much for listening, and a super thank you to Papa Scare for featuring in tonight's video. It was a pleasure hosting you, and come back whenever you want. Now, for all of those of you listening, I would very much appreciate it if you could check out his channel. He, in my opinion, as I said before, is a tremendously good narrator, and I think we're going to see really great things from him soon. So the link is on screen now, also in the description if you prefer clicking there, and he produces some quality content, so why not check it out. But for now, stay awesome. See you tomorrow.